Hey, what is up? In this video, we're gonna walk through the entire process on how to build a cabinet. We're first gonna design it in Easel Pro, then we're gonna cut it out on the X-Carve Pro, and then we'll show you really quick how it can be assembled. And actually, I'm recording this after the cabinet is completely built, and you can kind of see it right over there, and that is with the mess of the rest of my shop. So this is actually a better shot, so you can see what we are going to build at the end. So with Easel Pro and the X-Carve Pro, you've got a great combination to give you an end-to-end solution that's gonna help you create cabinets. Now the cabinet I built is pretty simple. It is just a wall cabinet. So I'm actually using it to hold spray paint, so it's only 7 inches deep, but overall it is 30 inches tall and 20 inches wide. And we're gonna show you how you can carve all those pieces out on the 4x4 X-Carve Pro. Now, before we cut it out, we actually need to design it. And for that, we're gonna jump into Easel Pro. Now we're just gonna be designing a single cabinet, but you can definitely use this entire process to do a full kitchen build out if you wanted. So a quick overview of Easel over here on the left side. This is where you're going to be able to do all of your designs. You can see we can add simple shapes, text, pro designs, all kinds of stuff right here. And then over here, this is actually giving you a real-time preview of what your design's going to look like. So if I just threw in a circle, and you can see that my circle is now on the material and get an idea of what it's going to look like. Then up here at the top, you can define your material. So right now this is 12 inches by 8 inches by a ½ inch thick. And then when you have an object selected, you can actually define its shape. So you can move it around to different positions. So we could put it at 0 if we wanted. We can also define its size. We can lock these dimensions. So we can make this 3. And then you can define the cut. So this is gonna give you the depth of cut. So since our thickness is a ½ inch thick, this can go all the way down or all the way back up. And you can also define how this is going to cut. Right now, this is making a pocket, but you could also make it a cut along the path. This can go all the way down and it would cut that piece out. And you can actually see that it's going to cut through the material as a result. So let's actually do our design. So in this case, we're gonna be using the X-Carve Pro. And then we are going to set up our material. So the workbed on the X-Carve Pro is 4 by 4 feet, but you can actually go longer, and you could actually do a full 4 by 8 foot sheet, and you're gonna be using tiling. We're gonna get deeper into tiling in a future video. So for this example, we're gonna be using a 4 foot by 4 foot sheet, so 48 inches, and then it's going to be 3/4 of an inch thick. Now you can see this is pretty much our entire work area. So if I zoom all the way out, this is what I'm working with. Now to actually design our cabinets, we're gonna go into the Cabinet Maker app. And the apps are over here by this little icon. You can see right here at the top, we've got our basic cabinet designer. This is gonna pull up a little module that's gonna walk you through the full process. Now, one thing to note, these are Euro style cabinets, so they are frameless. So meaning you're not gonna have any type of face frame that's going to be on the front of your cabinet. Also, everything currently is in millimeters, so we're just going to have to convert it. So our height is going to be 30 inches, which is 762 millimeters. Our width is going to be 20 inches, which is 508 millimeters. And then our depth is going to be 7 inches, which is 177.8. So by default, all the material thickness is already set to 3/4 of an inch, so 19 millimeters. So we're not going to have to adjust that. And you can see as we are adjusting our heights, our widths, and our depths, it's actually giving us a preview of what it's going to generate over here on the right side. So this is a flat pack version of our cabinets. You can see that we've got our top, our bottom, both of our sides, and then our back right there in the middle. And we're actually gonna create our shelves and our door in a separate workpiece here in a minute. Now the corner style basically is, do you want your sides going all the way to the top? So if you looked from the top down, you would actually see the sides of your cabinet, or do you want the top going all the way across? So if you look at it from the top down, you only see the top. That will depend on where you're going to put it, but in my case, I wanna have the top and the bottom go all the way across so you don't see it when it's hanging up on my wall. So for that, we're gonna select full top. You can see that our sides get a little bit smaller and our top and bottom get a little bit bigger. So we're not gonna do a base, but if I did select it, you can see this is basically going to add a toe kick to your cabinet. So if you're gonna be doing base cabinets, that is where that would be. And you have all of your settings for that. And then we have shelf pins. So you could define the number of pins that you want with this slider, but in our case, we're actually going to do shelf pins all the way down the side. So I'm just gonna select that. So none of of these settings we'll have to worry about. And the very last part has to do with how you're going to connect these pieces together. Right now, you can basically, we have a dado on all the sides, meaning you're gonna have a slot that's about 3/4 of an inch, and that is how you're gonna connect it together. You could also have that go all the way to the edge, so it's more like a rabbit. And to do that, you would select your back style as flush. And you can see that goes all the way to the ends. But in my case, I actually am going to do a groove because I'm going to use that to mount it to my wall, because I'm going to screw in a 1/2 inch thick board and then put the cabinet on top of it and then drill through it. So I basically need a 1/2 inch gap on the back of my cabinet. So for that, I'm going to put in 12.7 millimeters or 1/2 inch, and that's going to get me pretty close. And then you can adjust your tolerances depending on the material that you're working with. Now, once all of this is done, we're going to click this import button here at the very bottom. And you can see once I do that, everything gets placed on my board. And over here on the right, you can see a preview of what this is going to look like. So now we have our top, our bottom, our back, and our sides. We actually need to go ahead and make our door. And to do that, I'm going to do that on a brand new workpiece. And you can add workpieces down here at the bottom. That's what that big plus is. This menu might be collapsed. If that's the case, just hit that arrow. It's going to pull up. So I'm going to select a new workpiece, which is basically like making a new page or a new artboard. And I am going to add a square because I want my door to be the same size as the front of my cabinet. And again, the size of that cabinet is going to be 20 inches by 30. Now I'm going to come over to the cut menu because you can see right now it's basically making a big pocket of the door, but we don't need that. We just need the door cut out. So to do that, I'm going to flip this over to cut on the outside of the path. And we're doing it on the outside so that our dimensions stay the same. If we did it on the path or on the inside of the path, then you're going to be taking out some of the material because of the width of the bit. So if you actually want the piece to be what you put in the numbers to be, make sure and select cut on the outside. And then I want to make sure this is all the way down at the bottom at 3/4 of an inch. And once I do that, you can see that we have this cutting out. And now we're going to add our shelves. And so our shelves, the width is going to be the inside width of our cabinet, which is going to be 20 inches minus the thickness on the side. So 2 of the 3/4 of an inch or 1.5 inches, which is going to give us 18.5 for our width. And then for our depth, it's going to be 7 inches minus the thickness of the material. So that gives us 6.25 minus that 1/2 inch gap we have in the back. So 5.75 inches, and that is going to be our height. Now that might be a little bit different depending on what your tolerance was. And then sometimes what I actually do with the shelves is I'll just assemble the cabinet first, and then go in and measure the shelf since you're just going to be sliding it in anyway, and then see what that depth is going to be. Just in case something isn't perfectly square, we can make sure that it's actually going to fit. And again, like our door, we want to make sure our cut is going on the outside of the path and it's going all the way down. Now I'm going to do 3 of these, so I'm going to do Control-C, Control-V, and Control-C, Control-V. Now from here, you can definitely go in and move your pieces around to try to fit as much as you can on one board. But for the sake of the time of this video, we're just going to keep it as it is right now. Now, one thing we are going to go ahead and add to the door is the actual hinge. So we're going to be using soft close frameless hinges. So they have a circle pocket that is 1.25 inches, and you go in about half the thickness of your material, so 0.75 inches. So you can definitely use a drill press or something later to do that, but since this is already on the machine, we might as well carve it out from here. Now the trick that I do to get that is first center everything on the 0, 0 position or the origin of your work bed. So I'm going to select my door, then over here on the position, you can see it's at 1 and 1, and it's lining up on this corner. So what it's saying is this bottom left corner is at 1 and 1. I want that to be at the origin. So if I put this to 0 and 0, you can see it moves down to the origin. Now I do that because now when I go in and add a circle, which is going to be how we do our pocket, I'm going to be able to position it relative to the origin, so I'll make sure everything is spaced right. But before we do that, we know that the size is going to be locked. So first off, I'm going to hit that chain because I want the height, the width and the height to be the same. I'm going to do 1.25 inches. And now we have a 1.25 inch diameter circle. And then the spacing of the hinge is going to depend on the one that you get. But let's say that your hinge needs to be 1/2 inch from the edge of the door. You can do that by, again, using your position. So this bottom left corner right now is 1 inch away from the edge, and we want this to be a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to set my X to be a 1/2 inch. And then typically with the hinges, they're not going to give you a specific location in terms of how far it is from the top and the bottom. They just want that to be equal. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and go with 2 inches. And then I'm going to create one more, Control C, Control V, and then I'm going to mirror that position from the top. So we know that our door is 30 inches tall. So if we want to come down 2 inches, we're going to go down to 28 inches. To do that, we need to make sure you're selecting the top left corner because we want that distance to be 28 inches to give us the right gap. And then we want this to be 1/2 inch from the side. And then we want to go ahead and set the depth. So you just select the 2 circles. And then depending on the hinge, this was going to be different. But let's say it's half the thickness of the material, so 375 inches. And then from this point, you can select everything and you can actually move it around as one piece. And then from here, you can go around and arrange your pieces so you're using the least amount of material possible. If you select multiple objects, your align menu is going to come up. So I'm going to center everything to the left, and then you can adjust the spacing so it's even going up and down or left to right. Now, I'm not going to fully optimize it right now just to save time, but just know that would be your next step. So that's the design or CAD portion of Easel. Let's talk about how it generates toolpaths or the CAM side of Easel. So we've already been doing some of that work because we've been setting our depths of cut, but we also need to set what type of bit we're going to be using. So if you come up here to the top, you can select what bit that you want to use. And for this example, I'm actually going to be using a compression bit from Onserd. So whether you're buying your bits directly from us or you have your own custom bit, this is how you can add it. So if you come up here to the toolbox, you can see we have bits. You select that and then you can add in either an end mill or a V-bit. To do that, you just click Add Bit and then you can select Inventables or Custom. In my case, this is the Onserd 6113MW, long name, and this is a compression bit with a cutting diameter of 0.25 inches. And we'll get into all the different types of bits in the future, like upcut, downcut, compression, but for this video, we're just going to select compression and hit Save. So now you can see that it is showing up right here. And if I hit X and I come back up to the bit menu, this is now an option. Now you're gonna get a warning saying we haven't tested this bit with this material, meaning that it's not gonna give you an updated automatic cut setting. So if we actually went in and selected this solid carbide 2 flute, this is one from Inventables, that warning goes away. And now you can see these cut settings have changed. So a second ago it was 30 inches per minute. Now it is bumped up to 128. But for this example, and if you're using a custom bit, you can still adjust those cut settings by just jumping over to manual. Now the feed rate, plunge rate, and depth per pass, again, are a whole nother conversation that we'll do in another video. So that's why we definitely recommend just going with our recommended cut settings and then adjust it from there if you're using bits from us. But for this example, we're gonna be going up to 250 inches per minute. We're gonna do a plunge rate of 30, and then our depth per pass is going to be the thickness of the bit, so 0.25 inches. And then I'm actually gonna drop my RPMs down a little bit to 1400. And then you can adjust the fill method, and that is if you're doing a pocket. Basically, is it gonna go side to side, up and down, or go around in a circle? The only pockets that we have are gonna be for these dados, but because of their width, they're just gonna be going up and down anyway. So keeping it at the stock setting is totally fine. And then to the very bottom, you get the option to do a plunge cut. When it first starts its cut, it's gonna go down 1/4 inch, which is our depth per pass. It's just gonna go straight down. If you ramp it down, you can see you're gonna have a 5-degree or a 20-degree option. It's gonna be a lot less stress on the bit and the machine, and you're gonna get a lot nicer cut. It's gonna add a little bit of time, but especially when you're doing higher feed rates, it is really helpful. And typically we have a 20% set as your automatic setting anyway. So just keep it like it is, and then we are good to go. Now, one thing you might notice is we are cutting everything out, but you're not seeing our holes for our shelves. And that's because those pinholes are thinner than 1/4 inch, which is the bit that we are using. So because of that, you're actually going to add an additional bit. So I'm gonna select this double flute straight end mill to do these holes. And if I come over to the cut settings, you can see we now have 2. So our roughing and our detail. Now, because we've used this before, you're gonna get some automatic cut settings. Now, at this point, Easel has everything it needs to actually generate the tool pass. And you can get an idea of what that's gonna look like by hitting the simulate button. And you can see we're getting 2 different times. That's 6 minutes, that's going to be our 1/4 inch bit. That's cutting out the majority of our pieces. And then the 33 minutes is going to be for all of our holes. Now, you can actually play this back, and you can adjust how fast it's going, and you can see how that bit is going to go across our material. Then anything in red is going to be when it is moving between cuts. Our first cut is going to be in blue, and then our second detail cut is going to be in green. You can see it's doing the green right now. Now what's really nice is you get a pretty good estimate on how long this is going to take. And we find for folks that are especially quoting out different cabinet jobs, knowing how much machine time you're going to be using before you even do the carve is really, really nice. Because you can basically throw in whatever design you want, you can play around with it, you can build that into your quote or your estimation for your project. So the next step is to actually work with your material. In this case, I'm using 3/4 inch plywood, and I've actually already cut it down from a 4x8 sheet to a 4x4 sheet just to make it easy for filming and for you guys to see. And you can see that it's sitting on the machine right now. Now you don't actually have to cut this down. You could use our tiling feature inside of Easel, and you could use a couple outfeed, infeed rollers on the front and the back of the machine just to support your material. So our next step is going to be clamping down our material, and we're going to be using the T-slots on the machine. You have one on both sides, as well as one right here in the middle. We're just gonna clamp it down on the 4 corners for this material, but you could also use brass screws and actually screw this into the workbed. And then if you use brass, it's really soft, so if you do happen to hit it with your bit, you're gonna be fine. But you could actually pre-drill your screw locations inside of Easel, so you can see exactly where it's going to cut out, and then you can just put little holes around it for your screws. But in our case, just having those 4 points of clamping, it's going to be totally fine. So you just slide in these clamps, and then screw it into place. And then we're gonna do this to all 4 sides, and then we have our material secured. So we're gonna be using this 1/4 inch bit, and you just slide it into your collet, tighten it down, and then using some wrenches, we're gonna make sure that we have it tight. So now that we have our material on our machine, as well as our bit inside of our spindle, we can go ahead and turn on the machine. The power button is on the controller, which right now I have on the very back of the machine. And then when you turn it on, you're gonna see these 2 buttons at the top are green inside of Easel. This is going to be your jog menu. And in order to actually unlock the jog menu, it's gonna ask you to home the machine. Again, homing the machine is going to bring the spindle to the very top, and then the X and the Y to the 0 position right here. And you want to home your machine because at that point it always will know how to get back to the position it was before, especially if you're doing multi-stage cuts like we are, or if you lose power or something messes up and you need to restart. Make sure to always home your machine the very first thing that you do. So we're going to unlock it, and we are going to click home. So one thing to note is I've got this laptop stand, which is this right here. So this doesn't come with the machine. That's also why this is really close when I'm doing the Mark Zero. I just have it clamped down at the table at the bottom. Now there is one setting you might want to change that is outside of the typical menus, and that has to do with your safety height. If we come over here to machine, come down to general settings, you're gonna see your safety height as well as your origin safety height. And all the safety height is the distance that the bit comes up when it's traveling between tool paths. So in this case, it's coming up 0.15 inches, so it makes sure it doesn't hit any material, then it's going back down. But you can actually set a different origin safety height, and this is how far up the bit will travel at the very beginning. Now I'm gonna put this at 1.5 inches, and that's so that I can clear my clamps. Now initially, I wanna make sure I'm clearing the clamps and clearing all the knobs, but once we're actually carving, I want the safety height to be smaller because I'm not gonna be getting close to those clamps. And what that does is it saves you a lot of time that it's not having to come up and come down that extra distance while this is cutting out. So now that we have this set up, we can walk through the cut setup menu. All right, if I click on the carve menu, I'm gonna get this step-by-step process to make sure you're set up before you actually start your cut. So first we're gonna confirm our material. So this is birch plywood, it is 0.75 inches. Again, you wanna make sure you actually measure your material, so don't go off of just what you get. Next, we're gonna let it know that the material is secure. And we are going to be doing the roughing pass. Again, the detail pass is just gonna be for the holes. We're gonna be using this compression bit that we've already set up, this 1/4 inch compression bit. Now we're going to zero in the Z axis. We don't know the distance between the end of the bit and the top of your material. So we're gonna use our Z probe to do that. And the Z probe plugs into your controller right here. And then you have this brass puck as well as clamp. This you're gonna put underneath your bit when you run it, and this is going to be clamped to your machine. I'm gonna move this over a little bit just so you can see it a little bit better. And then to probe it, we're gonna click probe, going to confirm the position because it is over the material. We're going to attach our clip. It's already been attached. And then we are going to touch the plate to the bit to make sure we have connectivity. Gonna do that, and when we do that, this is going to turn green. And now we are going to start probing. And then I'm gonna click that our Z probe is put away. Now our last step is to set our XY0. So we just found our Z0 position. This is going to be the XY0 for your workpiece or your work 0. This is not the same as your machine 0. Machine 0 is what you find when you actually home your machine. The machine 0 is the furthest left and the furthest front that it could possibly be, but depending on your work material, that corner edge might be different. Now in this case, we're using a 4x4 sheet, so they're pretty much the same. So what I need to do is just reposition this over this corner, and I'm actually gonna move this clamp this way, just so I make sure the toolpath doesn't hit the clamp while we are carving. And that's one thing you want to make sure is that none of your toolpaths are interfering with your clamps when you're cutting this out. So I'm going to use these jog commands. Move this over. And then once you have the position that you want, just hit set XY0. Now that position is saved and we're gonna be able to reuse it in the future. Now at this point, you would connect your Dush shoe, which is a pretty simple process. I'm not gonna do it in this case so you can actually see it carving out. So I'm gonna skip this. Now since the easel can control the spindle, we're gonna turn the spindle on. Our spindle is on. And now we're gonna hit carve. Now, depending on how your carve went, you're gonna get a troubleshooting menu. If it did great, you can click this and actually save your cut settings. So if you did custom cut settings, you'll be able to save those for the future. And then if it did not go well, you're gonna get a lot of the common things that we see and the best recommended ways to fix it. So once you run through that first roughing pass, you're gonna come back in and use your detail bit. In this case, this is going to be an 1/8 inch bit. We're using that to get our shelf pin holes. So you'll switch out the bit in the machine and then it'll run back through the setup menu. Everything is pretty much gonna stay the same except for 2 parts. When you come to your choose path type, you're gonna click detail paths because now we're doing our detail paths, our 1/8 inch bit. Hit continue. You'll reconfirm that your bit sizes are correct. You will have to get the Z position 0 again, just because the distance between the end of the bit and your material is going to change. And then to find the work 0, you actually aren't gonna have to move this around and re-find it again. Because we already found it in the previous tool path, you can just hit used last position. So that's already stored in there. So anytime you're doing multiple tool paths on the same material, make sure and hit use last position. And then from here, we'll go ahead and cut those holes out. And then last but not least, since we put our door as well as our shelves on a different workpiece, we're gonna go ahead and cut those out. So you'll select your workpiece here at the bottom, then go through that same setup process for the tool paths and cut those out. So now that we have all of our pieces cut out, we need to remove them from the material and they're being held in by those tabs. Now, depending on how thick and how wide those tabs are, they might be pretty easy to remove with something like a chisel or even like a small Dremel tool. Now, at this point, you're ready for assembly. And if you're coming from a cabinet maker shop, this is going to be the part that you've done a ton in the past. In my case, I kept it really simple. I just used glue and brad nails to tack everything together. Then I came back with iron-on edge banding on all of those exposed edges so that you weren't seeing the plywood when you're opening up the doors or looking from the sides. Then I cleaned up all the glue spots, sanded everything, and then just painted it white. And then depending on what hinges you've bought, it's gonna have instructions on how to install those and drill in the holes, as well as the pull for the door, and then the pins for the shelves. But overall, we wanted to give you the full process of going from design all the way to a finished cabinet with Easel Pro and the X-Carve Pro. If you guys have questions about any parts of this video, make sure and let us know down in the comments. This is actually the start of a training series where we're gonna go way more in depth in a lot of these topics in the future. And if this video is already live, you can check those out right up there. All right, we can't wait to see the cabinets that you guys build, as well as the companies that you grow with the help of Inventables.